Hello, everybody. I think we're still waiting for a number of people to join. We've got quite a lot of people registered for this IP strategy workshop, and we're just going to give it a couple of minutes just to allow everyone just a few moments to join before we begin. Okay, so we have quite a few joined. We're expecting a few more, but in the interest of time, the number of people joining seems to have slowed down now. So we'll kick off and begin. We have about an hour long presentation workshop session with Rhonda O'Keefe, who's our senior manager in charge of intellectual property. And this is a really important part of the project development phase. Every project needs to show a intellectual property strategy. And so Rhonda's built some great templates. We've got the NGen IP strategy, which is online. And then we've got a bit of a guide on how to navigate this, and Rhonda will walk you through that. If you've got any questions, feel free to put them into the Q&A box within throughout the session, and we'll try and catch those questions and answer them sort of at appropriate points throughout the session. So, with no further ado, I'll hand over to Rhonda to kick us off in the session.
Right. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to run you through the intellectual property strategy workshop to hopefully help you with your project applications. But let's just start with a quick overview of what NGen is all about. So we're an industry-led, not-for-profit organization that connects Canada's strengths, so manufacturers, technology providers, government, research, academia. Our mission is to build world-leading advanced manufacturing capabilities in Canada. And we measure our success by the benefits it delivers to Canadians. So we want to develop world-leading technological capabilities, increase investment and innovation, enhance value creation, economic growth, connect and actively engage members of Canada's manufacturing ecosystem, contribute to the development of a skilled manufacturing workforce, and improve social well-being of Canadians. So our goal is to add at least 13.5 billion and 13,500 new jobs to Canada's economy by 2030. This is a nice overview of our year in review. So some of the things we've done, we've got 60 projects approved with 136 different industry partners in those 60 projects. One area I'll highlight too is over 200 IP opportunities generated to date. So this is 200 pieces of new foreground IP that it's expected to be generated as a result of these projects, either new in general or new to the companies participating in the projects. So as far as NGen and intellectual property go, what our goals are is to try and keep IP in Canada. And what I mean by that isn't just filing Canadian patents and that sort of thing. It's more, how do we help Canadian companies use their intellectual property to grow? How do we make Canada a global leader in innovation? Part of the way is through strengthening collaboration. So shared collaboration, shared competitive advantage will help companies accelerate their growth and accelerate innovation within the Canadian manufacturing ecosystem. The other thing we do is a little bit of education and awareness. And before I get into the main part of the presentation, we just like to do a couple polling questions to understand the demographics of our attendees. So John, if you could bring up polling question number 1. So what is your role in the NGen project? Oh, that's great. So it looks like we have The lead, most people are, well, over 57% are the lead organization, and 14% are other partners, and some 29% aren't developing a proposal at this time. All right, so as John mentioned, every single project needs to have an IP strategy. It's part of your application. And the goal of the IP strategy overall is to set out how you and your partners intend to manage, protect, and exploit the intellectual property from the project. I, as the IP manager, will support applicants to develop good IP strategies, provide some educated guidance as needed. And I also am responsible for the IP registry, which is going to be an online member searchable showcase, if you will, of the IP developed during some of the projects. And this is something I will work with the different groups on to have people post almost like a profile of their IP on this registry. And the goal with that is to try and connect organizations on the basis of, you know, different problems other companies have solved. So the IP strategy is very critical for your project, and often requires some negotiations among the partners. And so making sure that you're aligned up front will really help you put together a good, strong collaborative project. And should your project be approved for funding, you will eventually need to put together a collaboration agreement that's signed by all your project members. And this collaboration agreement has to have the licensing clauses for the foreground intellectual property that's developed as a result of the project. So it's good work to be done for a few reasons, not just for the application, but just to help strengthen your project. And then it helps the negotiations around the collaboration agreement. They tend to be done, it seems to be much easier later on. So a couple things I kind of suggest you want to do before you really get into get down the road in terms of your project development and that sort of thing is, prior to having a lot of discussions, which may involve sharing of intellectual property, make sure that you're protected. So this is just a little pre-homework. Take a look at it. If you've background IP, if you have been thinking about filing a patent application and you haven't done it, I suggest you go ahead and get that underway. You can file a US provisional fairly inexpensively. It's sort of an application that doesn't require all the pieces. So I really recommend that you take care of that before you get too deep into the negotiations on your project. Put a non-disclosure agreement in place between you and your partners if you're going to be having open discussions, and really avoid sharing your trade secrets unless absolutely necessary. And usually in the early stages of discussion, it's not necessary to share the secret sauce of your trade secrets. Maybe the existence of it, that you have that know-how, but you know, steer clear of the specifics. And in terms of foreground IP, this is an area you need to be a little careful of. If you start brainstorming solutions ahead of having an agreement put in place, you may end up with an inventorship situation and therefore an ownership situation that you didn't really want, because inventorship basically defines ownership unless you've said something different in a contract situation. And the other thing I suggest you do when you're, you know, at the beginning stages of developing your project and thinking down this path, if you haven't done it already, is to look at patents and prior art searching. So how do you really know that your project is new? How do you really know if it advances the state of the art or is transformative? And this will also help you answer some of your other application questions if you do a little bit of this homework. I suggest you conduct a prior art search, look at patents, look at literature, compare it, look at your competitors' similar products. The reason being, you can avoid reinventing the wheel. You can identify if you have any freedom to operate issues very early on and deal with them. It can also help you find other partners if you're searching through and you can find other experts in the field that you maybe hadn't thought of. So there's a couple free patent search tools I've listed here, a SpaceNet and Patent Lens. Both of them are free and they both cover worldwide patents, which makes your searching a little bit easier. I mean, you of course can also go through the individual patent offices for each country, but that only gives you the patents from that country. So I really recommend taking a look at one of these if you're thinking about doing a search. So what is intellectual property as far as NGen is concerned and as far as your strategy is concerned? It's everything that has real value to your organization and maybe makes you different or unique or provides your competitive advantage. It's your know-how, it's your trade secrets, it's ideas, drawings, data, copyright. So that could be software code could fall under copyright as well, trademarks, industrial designs, and anything that could be patented or is patented. And in terms of, so it's not only sort of these formalized types of IP, like the trademarks, the design, industrial designs and patents. It's also the sort of more informal, non-registrable IP, which is your know-how, your trade secrets, ideas. Those all count and should be included in your IP strategy. So overall, what needs to be in your IP strategy? A high-level description of how each company handles the IP. Have you done a freedom to operate analysis? Because if you haven't completed that already, you probably want to add that to your risk register when you're putting together your application. A list of the background IP each company's bringing into the project. So why did you choose these different partners? Why is everybody, what is everybody bringing to the table? Because that really goes a long way to showing just how collaborative the project could be. And who in the consortium, so who in amongst the project will need access to complete their part of the project. A list of the foreground IP you expect to generate as a result of the project, and who will own it, and how you will protect it. And then also how you'll share it amongst the partners, and how each company will exploit or commercialize the intellectual property. So now you want to start working on your IP strategy. And the first thing I suggest you do is ensure project alignment and focus. So have a discussion around the market opportunity. Who are the customers? Who are the competitors? What's the scope? Outline the solution and the approach overall as a whole, and then by each portion or component. And discuss and identify where you think the innovations, technical performance advantages are going to occur. Usually when you have a problem to solve or there's an unknown, that's where your opportunities for IP are. Outline each consortium member's role in the project, and then talk about what benefits each partner expects to get as a result of the project. So what's everybody's business intentions, and what technical advantages do they think they're going to gain, and how are they going to use them going forward after the project? So I've got some table template. I got a table template put together that's available for everyone. And these are just portions of the table shown on these slides. So it's pretty helpful exercise to use the tables because it sort of walks you through everything you need to consider for each piece of IP. So make a list of the background IP relevant to the project. And as I said before, this isn't just the sort of formalized IP, it's also your informal IP that can't be registered, like your know-how. Now, we want to know about each piece of IP that each company is bringing to the table. However, we do not want to know the secrets behind it. We don't need to know the proprietary information. We just sort of want a high-level title or name or identifier here. And then in terms of background IP, only needs to be shared with the other project members. And when I talk about that, I mean the nitty-gritty behind it, only needs to be shared with the project members if they need to use that IP to complete their part of the project. So we want to know about it, but you don't necessarily have to share it with everyone. So what we want to understand is sort of high level what it is, what part of your project it's relating to, who owns it, how is it protected, is it just know-how through confidentiality, or is it a patent that's pending or granted? Who needs access during the project, and what does their access look like? And then after the project, who needs access for commercialization? And this is something that's left up to the consortium to negotiate. It's not mandated, but it's interesting to know, and this helps you negotiate those and have those discussions if you actually look at it and consider for every single piece of IP being brought in, who actually needs to have access at the end of the day. So the next section is about the foreground IP, and this is the IP you think you are going to develop during the project. It's your best guess. It's not written in stone. But what you do is you look at the outline that you created in step 1 of the whole solution, and where you think your problems are, or where you think there's some unknowns, and naturally that's where your new foreground IP is going to fall out. And you list them here. You also, similar to the background, part of the solution it relates to, who's going to own it. And this is when you start negotiating, maybe having those discussions around who's going to be the owner. So if it's got inventors from 2 companies, is it going to be jointly owned, or are you going to decide based on the nature of the IP? So whose markets it's in, maybe that person will own it if it's related to the kinds of products that they sell. You want to understand how you think it might be protected. Is it an improvement on the background IP? So the reason this column is here is to understand that You know, if a new piece of foreground IP is going to be owned by someone, in order to use it, they may need a license to someone else's background IP in order to be able to completely use their foreground IP if it was an improvement on their background. Who needs access during the project and what does that look like? And who needs access post the project and what does that look like? So step 3 is looking at what you could do with the IP beyond the project, more inside the ecosystem, our ecosystem, the NGen member ecosystem, manufacturing in Canada. So what you want to think about is you want to think about, take all the pieces of the foreground IP you think you're going to be developing. You want to list out where your key competitive markets are. Oops, I gotta go back. Sorry, your key competitive markets here. And you want to say, this is where we're going to commercialize the intellectual property. And these are the countries we're going to commercialize it in. Then you also want to think about some non-competitive countries. Are there countries you're not going to go into, even if it is your key product or your key market? You might want to list these here because they could be potential opportunities to find partners to license your IP to if they want to sell in those countries instead of you. You also want to think about adjacent non-competitive markets, areas you've absolutely no intention of going into. And perhaps we can find an NGen partner that may be interested in going into that area and may be willing to negotiate a license with you or consider a partnership. Perhaps you then look for another partner to help you get into that market. So this is sort of an exercise in thinking about, you know, how could I possibly, you know, take that piece of foreground IP for this project and leverage it for future revenue and new commercial opportunities down the road and get a little bit more bang for your buck in terms of the development that you've created. And so then there's a couple columns at the end. So this is types of NGen members that you would be open to considering negotiating a license to, and types of members you would not be open to. And those could be your direct competitors or whatever, somebody who may not even be interested. And then based on all of this, I can help you actually find NGen members that we could propose or you could think about. And I can do a search through our database and give you some members that you could possibly consider. Next slide. Okay, so you've done all these things. Now you've got to take all this information and summarize all the discussions from the 3 steps together into a single document. So at the application stage, the IP strategy doesn't require that all of your license terms and details have been exactly decided, but should include at least a high-level understanding of the direction you think you're going to take. And then once you get in, if you're successful in your application and you enter into contracting, we will work together to finalize that IP strategy. And then you can use that to help you then draft your collaboration agreement that you'll put in place between all the consortium members. So I've got a couple things that are little NGen IP strategy myths. And I thought it'd be worthwhile to go through with the group. So the first myth is that you have to share all the IP with the project consortium, so your project partners. And I'll say this, so the goal is every single project that NGen funds, we want everyone to get what they need at the end of the day to continue their own commercialization activities and grow their organizations after the project has ended. So although we don't expect license and access beyond the project to be royalty free, we do expect that the collaboration agreement will have licensing terms, both during and after the project, that recognize the right of each participant to access on fair, reasonable, non-discriminating terms and subject to relevant competitive issues, all the foreground IP arising from the project for, at minimum, R&D purposes. And if background IP is required for the exploitation of the results of the project, so foreground IP, the background IP must be negotiated in a fair, reasonable, and non-discriminating terms as well. And that's something you should be aware of because your whole project will be structured sort of around those rules. So another myth is you have to share all of your IP with the supercluster ecosystem, and that's not true. So our goal is to help you realize the opportunities and advantages, but only when it makes sense. It's not to cannibalize your business or set up your competitors with your intellectual property. We also do not want companies disclosing sensitive information to either us or outside into our membership. The goal is to help you to come together in non-competitive applications to license to. And then we're hoping that, you know, this will sort of change the mindset of a lot of companies, because by licensing your IP, you potentially could be strengthening it by encouraging more applications and markets to utilize your technology. Of course, you get additional revenue that you can reinvest back into your organizations. And instead of creating, you know, adversaries who are trying to weaken or design around whatever patents or intellectual property you have, you know, you might have partners who are only going to help protect it even more. And we also think that, you know, it can develop relationships and further joint development agreements, which may help you get into completely new commercial activities. So I've got just a few tips that I'd like to share. So there's a guide available on our website in the same section that we have the project info and guide. And the tables are also there as well, and I encourage you to incorporate them into your IP strategies. Now, the tables themselves don't form the entire strategy. We expect you to sort of use them as a basis and build on it. But I also really recommend that before you get started, please read the NGen Intellectual Property Strategy, because that's the document that NGen has put in place with the government. And those are the sort of the rules that we need to follow around intellectual property in our projects. And it'd be really good for you to be well informed of those, and not just the lead recipient, but make sure that all the project partners have exposure to this document as well, because they need to understand what they're signing up for in terms of how the intellectual property be handled. And I really recommend that, you know, throughout the whole process in developing the IP strategy, you do it as at least have a few group sessions to make sure that everybody's sort of on the same page and there's not going to be any surprises further down the road. It also helps you develop a much stronger IP strategy that looks way more collaborative and will help make your application much more successful during assessment. I also suggest you work on it earlier rather than later, because a lot of the work that you will do or could do as part of putting together an IP strategy can also help you answer some of the other questions that you have in your application. You know, a lot of the market information, where you intend to commercialize, how collaborative the project is, how transformative the project is. A lot of this information can be also picked out of the IP strategy to support your answers to those questions. So I'd also like to ask John to launch a third polling question. And this one's around intellectual property topics that you would find useful. They're not related necessarily to, you know, preparing an IP strategy for the application process, but more in general, you know, other topics your organization might be interested in learning about intellectual property. All right. So these are our results. So it looks like the most popular topics are the collaboration ready and the collaboration agreement. And then next, freedom to operate versus patentability, and possibly also the intellectual property 101. Well, thanks everyone for participating. So next slide. So in terms of help and support, so the other thing I'll mention too is that NGen actually provides funding for patent costs for SMEs to protect the foreground IP generated by the project or during the project. If you look into the financial guide for your particular project stream, you'll see the details of that because different project streams and different project sizes have limits on the amount we're willing to provide funding for. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. And if you have any intention at all about you think you're going to file patents, it's possible, or do prior art searching and that sort of thing. We cover prior art searching and patenting costs, both in Canada and foreignly as well. You might want to consider making sure that when you put together your financial workbook that you've included some budget for that. The other thing we'll do is individual workshops. I have worked with different projects putting together the applications and ran sort of an IP strategy workshop and helped facilitate putting together the IP strategy. The other thing we've done is we have an Access the IP Expert series, and that last poll is going to help us decide what our next topic will be. We already ran a first session, and it's recorded in the event section on our website under archived, and it includes it focused mainly on preventing companies from sort of inadvertently sort of losing their IP and how you can best protect it within your organization, and maybe how you can also develop some better processes for managing your IP. So you can see that first session there. You can also send an email into our projects at NGen or myself. And then also on the Canadian Intellectual Property Office website, they have a really nice section, education tools and resources and for businesses on how to put together an IP strategy, different webinars and some training on intellectual property. It's another great place you can go. And so another thing I'll mention too, while I have everyone here, is that we have another webinar series coming up next week with Wendy Young, our expert in cybersecurity, and she will be presenting on the topic of cybersecurity, a 101 for manufacturing organizations. But that's basically the end of my presentation. I don't know if there's been many questions come in, and perhaps we can take a minute to take a look at some of the questions and see if we can answer any of those, folks.
Yeah, we've got one question so far. Is licensing IP into the project, not from the project partner, an eligible project cost?
Is licensing IP
into the project?
Into the project?
An eligible project cost, but not from a project partner.
But not from a project partner. So you need a license on the IP in order to do your project? That's a good question. If it falls under our rules, it could be. The difficulty, I think, is maybe determining fair market value and that sort of thing. And that's something we'd have to probably look at on a case-by-case basis with our finance group. But that's, if you have a real example of that and you're applying for a project, please get in touch with us and we can go to the finance group for that. So it could be.
I don't have an answer for that one either. That's the only question that's come in.
Okay.
On the previous slide, the project email is as per this site is project singular at ngen.ca, just for everyone. But do email us. We'll capture any questions and support.
All right.
Awesome.
So John,
we'll give it another 30 seconds to see if there's another any other questions. Well, questions come in on the chat. Do you have examples of collaboration agreements or templates?
Yes, actually we do. So we have a guide for putting together a collaboration agreement, which sort of walks you through the things you should consider and also points out some of the mandatory clauses we have, not to mention how the collaboration agreement ties back to the master project agreement, which is the agreement between NGen and the project consortium governing the funding. But we also do have some template. We do have a template agreement that, you know, we put together. It's not necessary. I would still recommend, if you do use something like that, that you do have to have it reviewed by your own attorneys, but we do have some examples to help with that as well.
Yeah, another question that's slightly off topic, but can you tell me, I'll take this one, Rhonda, can you tell me if capacity building project is the same as a pilot project? Yes, in essence, it is. We at NGen are transitioning for projects away from calling them capacity building projects. Basically, in the past, a feasibility project, a cluster building project, and a pilot project were previously classed as capacity building projects. But we're just going to call them projects from now on and stop confusing everyone. And so they're just projects from now on. We are launching a set of capacity building programs, which, as Rhonda mentioned, are the sort of what's next series and Access the Expert, and these are more programming rather than project based. So that's kind of, if that's where the confusions come from, then yeah, all projects will just be called projects in the future. But thanks for the question. And to the question on collaboration agreements and templates, we do have them, but I think what we'll do, Rhonda, is we're going to start putting some of those templates up on our website as well. We've reimagined the guides, and we're supporting those and getting them better. And as we do that, we're going to build up the website to have more resources on there for everyone as well.
Yep.
Okay, I think that's it.
Yeah, if there's no more questions, I think we ended a little early. So that's great.
Here we go. Sorry, is this presentation being recorded for future access? Yes, it is. So in our events page, it will go to archived, and there will be the slides and the recording of the presentation. Sorry, another question just come in. Do you have examples of licensing agreements as well?
So in the collaboration agreement, there is a section on intellectual property licensing and the different ways you can sort of go about putting together your clauses, the different approaches that we've seen different companies take. So yeah, you can see some examples. I think, you know, again, you probably want to, every situation is so unique, you definitely want to pass it by an attorney, but at least it gives you a place to start.
Okay, super. I think that's it. If you do have any other questions, by all means, email us, and we'll continue to capture them and build an FAQ page as well, if there's lots of questions that are similar coming in. So thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you.
Rhonda.